Hey everybody, this is John from Off the Wall Hockey, and this is episode 1 of the Chirpin From the Stands podcast. This has been something that I've done before, occasionally, nothing really regularly, but I've done a few podcasts before, and it's something that's really fun to do. I wanted to get a regular podcast going along with this YouTube channel, and I think this is going to be the year. So this is episode 1. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the podcast at the beginning and what I kind of want to do with it and where I see this going. Then we'll get into some hockey stuff. So, first of all, I'm going to try and keep pretty much each episode around an hour. I think that's a pretty good length for a podcast. It's not, I'm not going to make them all exactly 60 minutes or anything. Some might be a little shorter, like this one will probably end up a little shorter. Some will go a little longer depending on how good the conversation is and who else I have on the show and stuff like that. So, but they're all going to be around an hour long. I'm going to try to have guests on the show as much as possible. This today I do not have anyone, so it's just going to be me. But I really don't like doing that, and I was even debating not even recording this until I got someone to be on it. But then I figured, you know what, it's the first one, I'll just do it myself. But there's a reason that radio shows and podcasts pretty much all have multiple voices. It's supposed to be a conversation. It's supposed to be, a back and forth type thing with multiple people with different opinions and stuff talking about it. And it does get a little bit boring when there's only one person just kind of droning on about things. So I'm going to try and have guests on here as much as possible, hopefully almost every episode, because you really don't want to just listen to me for an hour straight just talking. As far as guests go, I do have a few people in mind that I'd like to get on, and I'm hoping that eventually over time we get kind of like a pool of reoccurring guests, people who are on it from time to time, um, and I can just kind of, have someone on each and every episode. I know I'd like to get my dad on an episode, at least one, hopefully more, this season, because, he's probably the biggest reason I'm a hockey fan at all, and he got me into this sport. But we'll have to see how that goes. He's not exactly the most technological guy, and certainly not a member of the media, so to say. He's not much of a talker. But if I could get him on a couple of episodes, that'd be great. I have a few friends I'd like to get on here, and I definitely have people in mind. And I think if I can get a pool of 5, 6 different people that could kind of be reoccurring guests on this podcast, then I think each episode could kind of rotate through them, and it would be a really interesting and fun show, and something certainly worth listening to. As far as how often I'm going to do episodes, I would like to do a new episode every other week. Obviously, I can't guarantee that because, schedules are very not set in stone. Even my own, I never really know when I'm going to be available and when I'm not on pretty much a week to week basis. So schedules are tough to work around, and that's certainly something to keep in mind. But I'd like to get an episode up every couple of weeks. So it'd be a bi-weekly podcast, hopefully. And basically, we're just going to talk hockey, and that's, I think, what we're all here for. That's certainly what this podcast is supposed to be. That's what this YouTube channel is. I'm going to try and get the podcast up on other platforms other than YouTube. Obviously, there will be it will be posted on YouTube. It won't be a video. It will just be the audio recording, but it will be put up on YouTube, and that will get its own playlist and everything. So all the episodes will be in one spot, easy to find. But I'm also looking to put it up on other platforms that for podcasts. I know there's a few different options out there, and I could probably get them up on multiple other platforms. So I just want to get as much exposure as possible for this podcast and Off the Wall Hockey in general, the Chirping podcast and the YouTube channel. But basically, it's just going to be talking hockey, and that's something that I think a lot of people are going to enjoy, and I'm certainly going to enjoy doing. And I think it's going to be much, even better when there's guests on here, and getting to talk to other people and getting their opinions on things and having just a good, person to person conversation about things that are going on in the NHL. So for right now, it's just me on this episode, like I said. So I'm just going to go through each division. Going to talk a little bit about, through the division, who's good, who's not, things that I see happening. Going to talk about players a little bit, players that I think might have big seasons, players that might have down seasons, and we'll just see where it goes. It's not a strict topic list or anything. It's just kind of gonna be talking and just having a conversation about NHL hockey. So the season starts on Wednesday. We're getting really, really close. I'm recording this on Sunday, the last day of September. So we are very close to having regular season NHL hockey on our television screens, in our arenas. Our teams will be hitting the ice very soon in games that actually matter. I'm really, really excited about that. I'm sure all of you hockey fans out there are as well. It's great to have hockey back, and I am hoping for a really exciting and good season this year. I think that there are certainly a clear set of favorite right now, but this is also what I would call a crushed beer can league, which basically means there's so much parity and there's so many teams that are really, right on top of each other as far as, how good they are. Teams are going to be separated by single digit number of points come the end of the season, and those single digit number of points are going to determine playoff spots. And there's really, when you look at different divisions, there are so many different teams that can be playoff teams, can make the postseason. And there are going to be some very disappointed teams and disappointed fan bases at the end of this year, just like every year, because unlike the NBA, and where it's really like you have like 4 or 5 really good teams and then that's it, and even the lower playoff seeds just don't even have a shot. The NHL is like the exact opposite of that. The NHL has so much parity and it's such a fun league to watch because anyone can win on any given night, and you're going to get surprises come the end of the year. And this is a league where a team like, say, Tampa Bay or Winnipeg are favorites at the start of the season, but they're certainly not guaranteed to even, go deep into the playoffs, because an 8 seed can beat a 1 seed in the first round of the playoffs. That second wild card team could knock off the highest seed. It's not common, but it's absolutely possible. A middle of the road playoff team, could end up making a run come playoff time, and we've seen that. And even look at Washington Washington was so close to being out in the first round. They lost the first 2 games against Columbus, and game 3 went to overtime, and if Columbus had scored in that overtime, and they had some great chances to put the puck in the net. If Columbus scores in overtime, they go up 3-0 in the series. Washington has a virtually 0% chance of coming back. And Columbus moves on to the second round to play Pittsburgh, probably loses to Pittsburgh, and we have a Pittsburgh versus Tampa Bay conference final. Who knows what would have happened there? We have a totally different Stanley Cup winner. For sure, if Washington's out in the first round, the whole playoffs change if Washington loses in the first round, and they were 1 goal away from basically doing that. But Washington scored in overtime in Game 3, cut the series lead to 2-1, went on to win the next 3 games, won the series in 6, beat Pittsburgh, beat Tampa Bay, and rode that hot streak all the way to a Stanley Cup championship, and you just don't see things like that in other sports. That is what makes the NHL so great. That is what makes hockey so great. Is there's so much parity and there are just so many good teams that anyone can beat pretty much anyone. And once you get into the playoffs, you have no idea. Teams go on runs all the time. So this is a really, really fun league to follow. It's an awesome, awesome league to watch. And I am really, really excited for this coming season. Um, I hope that the offense continues to stay up like it was last year. Goal scoring was significantly higher last year. We had a lot of, point per game players. We had multiple 100-point players for the first time in years. It's really, really fun. I hope the physicality picks back up a little bit. Last year was a really down year physically, not a lot of fighting, a lot of games that barely had any hitting in them at all. There were a lot of boring games that I watched last year, and that's not what I want to see. I want to see intense, high level, really mean, nasty, physical hockey between teams that don't like each other. And I want to see the physicality pick up a little bit this year. The playoffs were fantastic. The playoffs did not have many boring games at all, but the regular season got a little bit stale at points last season. So I'm hoping that the teams limit that as much as possible this year. So I'm just going to go through division by division and kind of give my thoughts on the teams there and look at who, I think's good, who's not, and what's going on in each division. So let's start in the Atlantic because I think I have the best grasp on the Atlantic, and the Atlantic is probably the most cut and dry at this point. When you look at the Atlantic Division, I think you have 4 clear-cut playoff teams and 4 clear-cut non-playoff teams, which splits the division right in half. And I think you can pretty much, the order of the teams we don't know, but I think we pretty much know who's going to the playoffs and who's not out of that division before the season even begins. Tampa Bay, I think, is your best overall team, not only in the Atlantic Division, but the league. They have the goaltending, they have the strong defense, they have the forwards, the elite offense. They are the best all-around team in the league, without a doubt, in my opinion. So I think that they win the division, and I think they are strong, strong Stanley Cup favorites going into this year. Toronto, I think, finishes second. I'm worried about Toronto's defense. I am greatly worried about Toronto's defense, but I don't think that it's going to be a big issue in the regular season. I think they're going to score enough goals that they're going to be fine in the regular season. The defense issue is going to show itself in the playoffs. But we're a long way away from April. We're a long way away from playoff time. So I think finishes second. I think they have a very, very strong season. And the addition of John Tavares is obviously massive for them and going to affect their team in incredibly positive ways. He is an elite NHL player. You have a team that was already a 100-point team last season and already a very good offensive team last season. And you add another elite NHL player to that team to go along with Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner, Patrick Marleau, all these other really good players that they have. So I think Toronto has a really, really strong regular season. I think they score a ton of goals, but come playoff time, I'm a little worried about their defense. I'm not a little worried, I'm a lot worried about their defense. They need to make some sort of move on the back end to get a true top pair. Morgan Riley is a pretty good defenseman, and he can be a solid number 2. He can be a really good number 2, but I think they need another top pair defenseman to go along with him. Boston kind of took everybody by surprise last year. Their kids played really, really well. They ended up almost winning the division, which nobody saw coming. A lot of people didn't even have them as a playoff team. The expectations in Boston, and I'm a Bruins fan, so I'm right around this. The expectations are much higher this season than they were at the beginning of last season for sure. This team is now expected to be in the playoffs. They're expected to make, at least win a round in the playoffs, and they're a team that people look at and think maybe they could make a run. I don't know. I don't think that they're a Stanley Cup winning level team yet. I think they're on the right track to become that very soon. I still think they might be a year or two away from that, though. But they're certainly a very good team and a team that could make a run, without a doubt, deep into the playoffs. So I think that they are looking very good heading into this season, and they're going to be a fun team to watch. And it's going to be really, really interesting to see how some of these younger players play. A lot of them in their second seasons, some of them in their first. Ryan Donato, this will be his first full NHL season. He only got 12 games at the end of last year. I'm really excited to see what he can bring. Jake DeBrusk, I think, is going to have a monster breakout season this year. Obviously, that top line of Bergeron, Marchand, and Pastrnak is just unreal. So, I'm really excited for the Bruins this year. Florida is the other team. They did not make the playoffs last year. I think that they absolutely make the playoffs this year. They were 1 point away last season. They had a tremendous second half of the year after a really, really rough start. And I'm picking them to absolutely be a playoff team. They've got all the talent that they need. I know Roberto Luongo is definitely, he's up there in age. He's we'll see how he holds up in goal as the season progresses, but they have an excellent number two who might even end up the number one in James Reimer. So they've got a good tandem in goal. They've got a strong young defense. They've got a lot of talent up front, and they can score goals. So Florida is looking really good as well. So those are your four playoff teams from the Atlantic, in my opinion. You have Tampa, Toronto, Boston, and Florida all making the playoffs. Then you have four clear-cut non-playoff teams: Buffalo, Detroit, Montreal, and Ottawa. Ottawa, I think, they're not probably. They are without a doubt the worst team in the league. They're an absolute dumpster fire right now. How they were in the conference final 2 years ago to where they are now, how that happened is just unbelievable to me. But yeah, they're just an absolute mess at this point. They've gotten rid of pretty much any valuable player on their team. Erik Karlsson's been traded. Mike Hoffman's been traded. Their lineup stinks. Mark Stone is like the only really good player left, and he's only there on a 1 year on a 1 year deal, and he's probably going to get traded at some point this season, and certainly going to leave in the off season if he's not traded this season. I don't think there's many players left that want to play in Ottawa. Bobby Ryan is still there, but I don't know if you would call him a good player at this point. He had a really bad year last year, and I doubt he's going to be much better this season with that lineup. So Ottawa, I think, is without a doubt the worst team. Detroit, also really, really bad. Although they've got some young players I think could end up kind of surprising everyone with how good they play. I still think as a team, Detroit is not good. They're going to be right near the bottom of the division. But they do have some really good young players. Dylan Larkin, obviously. Anthony Mantha, Tyler Bertuzzi. I think guys like that can really shine on a bad team and individually stand out as good players. That have bright futures ahead of them, even though the team overall isn't very good. Also, look for Philip Zadina, their first-round pick from this past year. Svechnikov is supposedly going to make the team, or supposed to make the team. So they've got some young talent there, but they're still a ways away from being good overall as a team. Buffalo, another team, they've absolutely stunk the last few years. They were the worst team again last year. But they've got Rasmus Dahlin, they've got Jack Eichel, another year of experience, Sam Reinhart, Casey Middlestat in the lineup now. They've got some really good young talent. They are a team that I think is going to be noticeably better than they were last year. They have a real goaltender finally in Carter Hutton. Hutton's never been a starter before, so we really don't know how he's going to look over the course of a full season as the starter. But he had a tremendous year as the backup in St. Louis last year. So it finally feels like they have a real goaltender after being an absolute dumpster fire in net for the last few years. So Buffalo, I actually think, is going to have a good season. Certainly not a playoff team yet, but definitely improved over what they've been. And I actually have them finishing 5th in the division, just behind Florida, although significantly behind Florida points-wise. And lastly, Montreal, I really don't. They're going to be. They're not going to be good, but the question is how bad are they going to be? Are they going to be like really, really bad, like down in the dumps with Ottawa, or are they going to be up with Buffalo, not a playoff team, but a little bit better, showing signs of improvement and not completely terrible? I really don't know what to think with this Montreal team. For some reason, a lot of their fans seem to think that they're going to be, not that bad, not the complete dumpster fire that we saw last year. I kind of disagree. I think they're going to be right down with Ottawa as really, really bad. Carey Price had a really, really rough year last year. I think that he'll be better this year. He should be better this year given who he is, given he's supposed to be one of the best goaltenders in the league. It's kind of hard to be that when you have such an awful defense in front of you, but how much better is Carey Price going to be? I don't expect him to be giving up 3 goals a game, but he's not going to, have a 2.15 goals against and a 925 save percentage with 7 shutouts with this team in front of him. So Carey Price hopefully has a bit of a bounce back season, but I don't think he's going to be, an absolute game changer to take this team, from being where they were last year to a playoff spot. And their defense is just so bad. When you look at, Shea Weber's out for months. They just have nothing on the back end. Jeff Petrie is their best defenseman in the lineup right now, and I mean it's just such a back there. I don't know how they're going to keep the puck out of their own net. And up front, goal scoring's been an issue for them. Generally when you have a lot of teams are good defensively, but they struggle to score goals, like the LA Kings. Other teams can score a ton of goals, but they can't keep the puck out of the net, and that's what ends up hurting them. We've seen that in recent years with like the Dallas Stars. High-flying offense, but can't keep the puck out of their own goal. Montreal can't score and can't keep the puck out of their own goal. They've got both problems. It's not like offense is the issue, but their defense is fine, or defense is fine, but the offense is the issue. They can't play defense. Their defense core is atrocious. Definitely one of the 5 worst defense cores in the league, and they can't score. So I really am not expecting Canadiens this year. I think that they're going to have a very, very rough season, and they probably won't be as bad as Ottawa, but they're probably not going to be much better either. So that's it for the Atlantic Division. Moving over to the Metro now. Metro Division is good. They have a lot of good teams. I think it's easier to start in the Metro with your bad teams, which are the 2 New York teams. I think that they are the clear-cut teams to finish bottom spots in the Metro Division. The Rangers are a rebuilding team and they know it, so they really don't have much for expectations going into this year, and I don't think that they're going to be very good. They're probably going to finish last in the division, but again, that's a team that knows that they're rebuilding and they are gearing up to get better in the future, not be the best right now. The New York Islanders, losing John Tavares is just an absolute kill shot to them. He was their best player by far. They weren't even a playoff team with Tavares. Now without him, they have virtually no chance. Matt Barzal and Anthony Beauvillier are 2 incredibly talented young players that I really, really like. I like Josh Bailey. I like Anders Lee a lot. They have some talent there, but they're certainly not a playoff team, and there are much better teams in the East than them. So I have them finishing pretty low. But they have a pretty tough team with Ross Johnston, Matt Martin, Cal Clutterbuck. So I think they're going to at least be a fun team to watch. They're not going to be very good, and they're probably not going to win many games, but when they're on TV, I'm going to want to watch them because they're going to be physical, they're going to fight, and they're going to be entertaining to watch. So the 2 New York teams, I think, are your worst teams in the Metro. Then I would say probably Carolina. They haven't, I don't think, done much to get all that better. They made that big trade with Calgary, sending Noah Hannafin and Elias Lindholm to Calgary for Michael Furland and Dougie Hamilton. But that's kind of a player swap in my opinion. I don't think that makes them significantly better or significantly worse. They just kind of swapped players. So I don't see that changing things all that much. I just, something is missing in Carolina. Goaltending is also a big issue there. Obviously, Scott Darling had a horrendous season last year as the starter. Hopefully, he gets a little bit better this season. He certainly should. Otherwise, he's going to find himself not a starter in the NHL for very much longer if he plays again like he did last season. Carolina fans certainly are hoping that he can play a lot better and become the starting goaltender that everyone expected him to be once he left the backup role in Chicago. But I don't have high expectations for Carolina. After that, I think you have you have good teams. New Jersey, Columbus, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Washington. I think you have good teams there, all certainly capable of making the playoffs. Now, I have 4 teams making the playoffs from the Atlantic, which means only 4 are going to make it from the Metro, not 5 that have been making it. Generally the Metro's been sending 5 teams to the playoffs while the Atlantic only 3 because the Metro's been significantly better than the Atlantic. That's not really the case anymore, at least not the top end. The top end of the Atlantic is very, very good. So I'm definitely looking for only 4 teams from the Metro to make it, and I think New Jersey is going to be the odd team out, but Columbus certainly could be as well. I think it's going to be a fight between the Devils and Columbus for that last wild card spot and to make the playoffs. And whichever team out of those 2 makes it is going to be the wild card team, and then whichever team doesn't is going to be very disappointed. But New Jersey really didn't do anything this offseason to make themselves better, which I found interesting given the fact that they were a surprise playoff team last year. No one really expected much from them, and then there they go, they make the playoffs, basically on Taylor Hall's back. And you'd think that they'd want to build off that and come back even better this year and solidify themselves as a playoff team, but they didn't really do anything this offseason. So I don't know what is really going on there, but I think it's going to be hard for them to make the playoffs with the lineup that they have. They needed to make a big addition this offseason, and they didn't do it. So I don't see how they're any better than they were last year. And I think that while Taylor Hall is a fantastic player, I don't think he's going to be able to carry the team the way he did last season, not 2 years in a row. So kind of not expecting New Jersey to make it, which means Columbus, I think, just squeaks into the playoffs. But overall, probably doesn't go very far, probably a first-round exit for them. Then I actually think Washington finishes 3rd. I've been saying this for a couple of years now that I thought that Washington would be on the decline, but now looking at their lineup, I really think that there are some holes in that lineup, especially in the bottom 6 forward group and on the back end, that I don't see them having enough to win the division. I don't see them being better than Pittsburgh or Philly. And I also think that there's going to be a Stanley Cup hangover there. It took a lot for them to win the Cup last year. They played beat and bang, hard-nosed, big boy hockey all playoffs long. They were one of the most physical teams in the playoffs. They played a lot of hard-nosed minutes, and I think that just takes a lot out of you, especially when you play into June. It takes a lot out of you. So I'm expecting a Stanley Cup hangover. I think that they're going to have a rough start to the year. I think they'll definitely turn it around by December and end up being the team that a lot of us expected, but the rough first 2 months just kind of sets you back. So I have them finishing 3rd. I have Philadelphia finishing 2nd. I think that the addition of James Van Riemsdyk makes a very good team even better. They have a tremendous forward group, 3 scoring lines, just really, really strong up front. They're going to score a ton of goals, and I think that they're going to be a really fun team to watch. They have a really, solid defense core, a good mix of veteran guys and also young players. You've got Robert Hagg and Travis Sanheim, Ivan Provorov, Shane Gostisbehere, but then you also got Andrew McDonald and Radko Gudas, who have been around the league for a long time. They're a very good team. Their biggest question mark, again, and I feel like we've been saying this about Philadelphia for the last 20 years, is their goaltending. Can Brian Elliott play at a high enough level to have Philly win 50 games or so? That's going to be the question. And then can Michael Neuvirth back him up well enough to get wins when Elliott isn't in the lineup? What if Elliott has a lousy year? Can Neuvirth step in as the starter and win enough games? Goaltending seems to always be the issue and the question in Philadelphia, and I think this year is no different. Injuries to those goaltenders is another thing. Brian Elliott has struggled to stay healthy. Michael Neuvirth has struggled to stay healthy. If you get down into your organizational depth of goaltending, if you're down to your third or fourth goaltender, it's going to be hard to win games at the NHL level. So, while Philadelphia, I think, has a fantastic team, a lot is riding on how well their goaltenders play and how well their goaltenders stay healthy. But if they stay healthy and just play good enough, I think Philly is a very, very strong team in the East. And I have Pittsburgh winning the division. They're just a great team. I think Matt Murray had a really down year last year. I think he has a bounce back season and really shows us the goaltender that he can be and the goaltender we expect him to be. Their defense, Pittsburgh's defense, isn't great, but I think the addition of Jack Johnson really kind of gives them another stable veteran in the bottom pair, a defensive defenseman, a guy who can focus on keeping the puck out of their own net, and I think that's going to help them a lot. Forward-wise, they're Pittsburgh. They can score goals from anywhere in the lineup. They've got Sidney Crosby, they've got Evgeny Malkin, Phil Kessel's still there, Patrick Hornquist's still there. They're just really, really good up front. So I have them winning the Metro Division. So from the East, the 8 playoff teams I have making the playoffs from the East are Tampa Bay, Toronto, Boston, Florida, Pittsburgh, Washington, and Columbus. Hopping over to the Western Conference in the Central Division, I think the Central Division is the best division in the NHL. There are no bad teams in that division. Whoever finishes last in that division will still at least be an average NHL team. There are no bad teams there. I think Winnipeg has been the favorite going into this season as far as winning the division. I think they've overtaken Nashville as the best team there. Winnipeg is going to be really, really good. They've got a great lineup throughout. Their forward group's fantastic, all 4 lines. They have a really, really solid defense. Connor Hellebuck in goal. That they are poised to have a monster season up in Winnipeg. I just wish they had as good of third jerseys to go along with it, but they botched that. But overall, I have big, big expectations for Winnipeg, and I think they're going to live up to them. They are a great team, and it's taken a while to build that great team in Winnipeg, but I think this year it really comes out and shows what they've been working towards and how good that they actually can be. Nashville and St. Louis, I think, are very, very tight as far as how good they are. I think Nashville has the better defense. I think St. Louis has the better offense. St. Louis, a lot is going to ride on Jake Allen in goal with that team. They've made so many changes, so many additions this offseason through free agency and trades. They've put a fantastic team on paper out on the ice, but we'll have to see how they gel together, how well they perform all together. And Jake Allen is going to be the question. When you look at the other teams in that division, Hellebuck in Winnipeg, fantastic goaltender. Pekka Rinne in Nashville, fantastic goaltender. Devin Dubnyk in Minnesota, great goaltender. Then you've got Jake Allen in St. Louis, and there's so many questions there. He seems to not be able to put a full season together. There are times he looks absolutely brilliant, and there are times he looks like an absolute dumpster fire in goal. So they need a big season out of Jake Allen. And if they get that, if Jake Allen becomes the goaltender that so many people thought he would be when he first came into the league, then St. Louis has a legitimate chance to not only make the playoffs, but win the division. But if Jake Allen falls flat on his face and can't stop the puck, they don't have Carter Hutton backing him up anymore. So they could possibly, that could possibly ruin their season, and they could miss playoffs because of him. So there's a lot riding on Jake Allen in St. Louis. Nashville, the only worry I have with them is their goal scoring. Um, I think they have the best defense in the league, 1 through 7, really. They have the best defense in the league. Pecorine is an elite goaltender. They're fine at keeping the pucks out of their own net. My question with them is goal scoring. Philip Forsberg and Victor Arvidsson kind of have to carry the whole team goal scoring wise. They don't have much as far as secondary scoring. And I think if they rely too heavily on their top line to get goals, I think that could end up hurting them, especially in a division as good and as tight as the Central. It's going to be really, really difficult to keep up with teams like Winnipeg, St. Louis, and even Minnesota or Colorado if you can't score goals. But Nashville will be okay. I think they're in danger of missing the playoffs or anything like that. I just don't think that they're going to win the division. I think that they're going to drop back into that 2 or 3 spot. Minnesota's kind of been a hot pick for people to pick as, a team to miss the playoffs, and I certainly think that that's possible. But they're a real interesting team to look at. They've added some real, all their additions this offseason have mostly been veteran depth players. They've added Greg Patterin on the back end. They've added Eric Fair, Matt Hendricks, and JT Brown up front, all physical, veteran depth fourth line guys. So I think that Minnesota likes their what they have in place as far as their core. They just wanted better pieces around that core and people that are going to play a certain style of hockey that I think they made very clear with the guys that they brought in that they want to be more physical and they want to protect each other. They don't want to get manhandled. And last year in the playoffs, Winnipeg kind of took it to them physically, and they struggled to keep up with that style of play. And in a division with Winnipeg and Nashville and St. Louis, who are all pretty physical teams, and then when you hop over to the Pacific, you have more physical teams with Edmonton and LA and Calgary and teams like that. So Minnesota made a noted effort to get more physical, and I think that could pay dividends for them this year if they can play that style of hockey and play it well. Colorado, they made the playoffs last year. I do not have them making the playoffs this year. They literally were, talk about jumping on someone, riding one player who had an MVP season, and that's Nathan MacKinnon. He absolutely led that team from the graveyard of the NHL to a last year. They certainly caught me by surprise. I don't think that they can do that 2 years in a row. I think they have a good team in Colorado. They have a young team in Colorado. They have a team that is certainly building for a very, very bright future, but I think this year they just kind of take a little bit of a step back, mostly because of the emergence of St. Louis, and they end up just out of the playoffs, missing it by only a couple of points. Dallas did not make the playoffs last year. They haven't in a couple of years, and they're a team that they really expect to make the playoffs. They want to make the playoffs, and they think that they should be a playoff team with guys like Tyler Seguin, Jamie Benn, John Klingberg on the back end. Something's got to click with them. Something's got to start clicking because they haven't made the playoffs in a number of years, and they've got a roster that should. So in a very tough division like the Central, it's going to be difficult for them to make it, but they really need to put in a strong effort this year and try and get there. Goaltending's an issue there as well. Ben Bishop has not been what he was in Tampa Bay since leaving Tampa Bay, and he's had injury problems. So goaltending could be a problem. They brought in Anton Hudobin to be the backup, who had a very, very good year in Boston as the backup last year. I think he's a great backup goaltender, and I would love to have him as my backup goaltender. But if Ben Bishop gets hurt and Hudobin has to play for 6 to 8 weeks, let's say, I don't know if he can be a starter for that long. I think he's a very good backup, but I don't know if he's a starter. So, goaltending is going to be something to watch with Dallas this year. They're a high-flying offensive team. Can they keep the puck out of their own net? Is their defense good enough? Is their goaltending good enough? That's the question with Dallas. And then Chicago, I have them finishing last again this year in the Central Division. I just think that they're a team on the decline, and while they have some good young pieces coming into the fold, they're still in a rebuild, and they're going to need to kind of suffer for the next year or two, maybe even 3, before those young pieces develop into the great NHLB, and then they start to come back up on the rise. But I don't have much as far as expectations for Chicago this year. And Corey Crawford might not even start the season because of these lingering concussion symptoms. This could be a serious issue for Chicago. If Corey Crawford may never be Corey Crawford again. He may never be right again. And that would be a huge blow to the Blackhawks because he's their franchise goalie and they really don't have anyone ready to take his spot. So I think it's going to be a long year in Chicago. Move to the Pacific Division. I think San Jose, with the addition of Erik Karlsson, has catapulted themselves to being the best team in the Pacific. I had them winning the Pacific before the Karlsson trade, and now it's without a doubt. They've got such a great defense. Martin Jones is a more than solid goaltender, and they've got some good talent up front. Not a lot of big names up front, but some really talented players. And then you've obviously got the big names who are there: Evander Kane, Logan Couture, Joe Pavelski, Joe Thornton. They're gonna score goals and they're gonna keep the puck out. They're just a very solid team. And in what is probably one of the weaker divisions in the NHL, the Pacific, that's going to be more than enough to win it. Then you have Vegas. Vegas is, what they did last is unbelievable, but I don't think that they're going to be that good again. I still have them being obviously a playoff team and pretty good. I just don't think they're going to be at the level that they were last season. Last year was just magical for them, but they have a very solid lineup. They have 4 good lines. They have a good defense core, and then Marc-Andre Fleury in net. They're a really good team, so I have them finishing second. LA finishing third. I think goal scoring is the clear problem with the Kings. They cannot score enough goals. They've brought back Ilya Kovalchuk, and I think that a lot of LA's season rides on how good Ilya Kovalchuk plays. If Kovalchuk is a 30 goal scorer and a really good player like he was before he left for the KHL, I think LA is going to be really good this year and maybe even better than third in that division. If Kovalchuk comes back and it looks like a 35-year-old, looks like he's lost a step for that many goals, maybe only 17 or 18, then I think goal scoring is going to continue to be the issue, and it's going to be a battle in LA to be the team that people hope that they are. Jonathan Quick, obviously one of the best goaltenders in the league. If he stays healthy, you always have a chance with Jonathan Quick in goal. Their defense is pretty good, led by Drew Doughty. It's not elite, but it's decent. It's certainly serviceable. And it's their forwards that are the question mark, really. It's can they score goals. After LA, I think it's kind of a crapshoot as far as who's good and who's not. I think you've got Calgary, who could be. Edmonton could have a bounce back year. Anaheim, I think, has a very down year. They're already riddled with injuries. And then Vancouver, your clear bad teams in that division. Arizona, I think that they're going to be better than they have been the last couple of years, but they're still a ways away. Vancouver, I think, absolutely stinks this year. I predict that they'll finish last in the Pacific. They're just a team that still has a ways to go. Calgary, they made a lot of additions this offseason. The big trade with Carolina, bringing in Lindholm and Hannafin. They've added Derek Ryan in free agency. They brought in James Neal. They're a different team this year, and they're a team that's been disappointed with them not making the playoffs last year. So they're hoping to make the playoffs this year. It's going to be really tough for them to get in, but they certainly have a chance. Edmonton could have a bounce back year. Obviously, they made the playoffs 2 years ago, made the second round. Everyone was like, finally, the Oilers are good. Then they absolutely were atrocious last season and had an abysmal year. So, we don't really know what to expect from them this year. They could be just as bad as they were last year, or they could go back to being what they were 2 years ago, where they made the playoffs and were looked like a legitimate threat in the West. So, a lot in Edmonton rides on Cam Talbot and how he plays because he was very, very bad last year. Their defense was very, very bad last year, so they need to see some improvement there. And they need to see improvement in the secondary scoring, which was atrocious last year. They cannot rely solely on Connor McDavid to do everything for them. They need to put a team out there around him that can play with him and play up to that level. So, there's a lot of question marks in the Pacific Division, and there's a lot of who knows what's going to happen. There's just Anaheim. I'm really down on this year. Forgot to talk about them. They're already riddled with injuries. They're a team that's on the decline already, and now they've got Corey Perry out, Ryan Kessler out, Patrick Eves out. I know I'm missing guys. They've got a lot of players out before the season even begins. I think this is going to be a very, very bad year for the Ducks, and they're going to need to go into rebuild mode. They're an old team. Their good players are old for the most part. They've got some decent young guys. Ricard Raquel is an absolute star. Josh Manson's great on the back end. Andre Kasha, I think, can be really, really good. They have some good young pieces there, but they're still heavily reliant on older players like Ryan Getzlaf, like Corey Perry, like Ryan Kessler, and they need to go through a quick rebuild to get to move on from those guys and get some young talent in there. And I think that they can do a quick rebuild, not a long, drawn-out process the way Buffalo and Arizona are doing it. I think that they have the ability to have a couple of bad years and then be right back in as a playoff team, 3 or 4 years down the road. But I think that this is going to be the first of some very bad years for the Anaheim Ducks. So, as far as playoff teams in the West go, I don't know if I should break 4-4 or if I think 5 teams from the Central might make it rather than 4-4, and only 3 get in from the Pacific. So let's say I'll do both. Let's say if it breaks out to where 5 from the Central get in and only 3 from the Pacific get in, I think your 5 teams from the Central are going to be Winnipeg, St. Louis, Nashville, Minnesota, and Dallas make the playoffs from the Central, and then San Jose, Vegas, and LA make it from the Pacific. If it splits out 4-4 and 4 teams from each division get in, then I think from the Central it will be Winnipeg, St. Louis, Nashville, and Minnesota, and from the Pacific Division it will be San Jose, Vegas, LA, and probably Calgary that get in from the Pacific. So a lot of parity in the league, and there's just so many teams that could be better than we expect, so many teams that could end up worse than we expect. Obviously, there are surprises every year, so we're just gonna have to wait and see how it all turns out. As far as players that I think could have really big years, I think Nikita Kucherov is in for a monster year in Tampa Bay. I think Ivan Provorov has an absolute breakout season on the back end in Philadelphia. I think Jake DeBrusk in Boston and Ryan Donato both really put themselves on the map as far as really good young goal scorers. I think Anthony Mantha and Dylan Larkin both have huge years in Detroit because they're basically Detroit's entire offense. I think Connor McDavid has another massive year, 100-point season without a doubt. I think he's a 100-point guy every year. The question is going to be, can they get scoring from people other than Connor McDavid? I think Vegas probably takes a step back from what they were last year. I definitely don't see them going to the Stanley Cup again. I think that William Karlsson isn't as ridiculously good as he was last season. I think that there's a bit of a step back there, but still a solid, good team. Overall, I'm just excited for the season, and I think that it's going to be a fun one to watch, and I think it's going to be a really close. The standings are going to be really close, I think, for most of the year. You have some really good, standout teams like Tampa Bay, like Winnipeg, like Pittsburgh, like Nashville, like San Jose, but then you have a few bad teams, but most of the league is really kind of all bunched up on top of each other, and you don't really know who's gonna who's gonna end up being really good and who's gonna end up being okay and who's gonna end up having rough years. You know that the bad teams, there are only a few like truly bad teams in the NHL, and they're Vancouver, Arizona, Ottawa, the New York Rangers, and maybe Montreal or Detroit too. But even Detroit and Montreal both have a chance to maybe be closer to average than bad. The New York Rangers maybe have a chance to be closer to average than bad. So there's really not a lot out there that you look at and just go, wow, they're absolutely atrocious. So again, that's how the NHL is, and that's what makes this league so great, is that all these teams are right on top of each other, and that they're all really really close, and you don't know who's going to make the playoffs. When you watch the NFL, when you watch the NBA, you know who's going to make the playoffs. In the NHL, I mean, other than your clear-cut favorites, you don't know who's going to make the playoffs. And even then, look at Edmonton last year. Edmonton, at the beginning of the last season, was a hot Stanley Cup pick. Not only a playoff pick, they were supposed to win the Pacific, maybe even win the West, and go to the Stanley Cup, and they ended up not even close to a playoff spot. So that's what makes the NHL great. That's what makes it worth watching, and it's really interesting and fun to watch throughout the season and see how things progress and how everything works out, because you know there are going to be tons of surprises. So that's it for episode 1 of the Chirping from the Stands podcast. Again, I'm John from Off the Wall Hockey. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. Hopefully this will be the only one where it's just me talking. I'm going to try and get guests on each episode, to make it, a lot more interesting and a lot more fun, rather than just listening to me talk for an hour. Get some good conversation going and stuff like that. But the first episode, I couldn't get anybody for this one, so just had to be me. But in the future, there will definitely be guests on here, and hopefully some reoccurring guests, and we just get a group of people, that I can get on and kind of rotate through, and always have someone else on the show. Thank you very, very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed it, and be sure to check out Off the Wall Hockey on YouTube if you're watching or listening to this on another platform, and subscribe to that channel. I do videos, multiple videos a week all the time, about all different topics from across the NHL. If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you hit the subscribe button and you're subscribed to this channel, because you will not only get to listen to these podcasts, but also all the other videos that I do. That's it, and I will hopefully going to be recording another one of these in a couple of weeks. I'd like to make this a bi-weekly thing, where every couple weeks I get a new episode up. So I hope that you'll come back and listen to that one when it gets recorded and posted, and hope you all enjoy this NHL season. I hope it's a good one. I know I'm going to be watching closely like I always do, but some years are better than others, and I'm just hoping that this year is really, really exciting and gives us a lot of good stuff to talk about and a lot of good hockey to watch, because hockey is my favorite sport, and if I'm going to spend the time following it and watching it, I want it to be worth doing so. So, good luck to all the teams out there. Good luck to all of you with your favorite teams. I hope that they have a good season. Obviously, not every team can have a good season, but best of luck to everyone. Can't wait to see what this season brings. So, thank you again for listening, and hope that you'll join us for the next one. That's it. I'm John from Off the Wall Hockey. I'm out.